All right. So we talked a little bit about the law of supply. Now let's talk about what will change supply. So before we talk about supply, let's talk about quantity supplied. So what can increase quantity supplied? Well, we've already talked about one of those, which is an increase in price. Okay, higher prices lead to a higher quantity supply, all else equal. Um, but also, we can have an increase in supply. Now, just like when we did with demand, an increase in supply means that this whole thing shifts. That at any price, we're seeing a larger quantity supplied than we saw before. Now, a good way to think about when supply would shift is with demand, it had to do with how much you wanted a good or service. With supply, it all has to do with how easy it is to produce a good or service. It all has to do with production. So when you're trying to figure out, hey, is this demand? Is this supply? If it has to do with how easy it is to produce the good, that's when it's going to be supply. So a change in supply, an increase is going to move it to the right. A decrease is going to move it to the left, just like it was with demand. So let's talk about what actually shifts supply, though. So what increases supply? Anything other than price that changes the cost or opportunity cost of production. Okay. Um, so let's say something comes along and it makes it cheaper to produce. Well, as a consumer, we don't really care about that. We don't care about how easy it is to produce. That's not going to affect demand, but it is going to affect supply. So, so here's some things that change supply. The first is easy. More suppliers generally means more supply. Okay. Um, the next, and this is probably the most common, is a change in input costs. Um, so, for example, if you are an airline and all of a sudden pilot wages increase, okay, they've got a union and they ask for higher wages. Well, that's going to make it more expensive to run your business. So that's going to lead to a decrease in supply. Or let's say that all of a sudden you can find a lot of cheap land. Okay, well, now the cost of growing crops decreases. So that's going to increase supply. So anything that increases your input costs is going to make it harder to produce. It's going to decrease supply. Anything that decreases your input costs is going to increase your supply because it makes it easier to produce, makes it cheaper to produce. Very, very often, you're going to see new technology come along that reduces the cost of production and increases your supply. All right, so the next big thing, and this one is a little confusing at first, changes in prices of supply substitutes. Now, we've talked about substitutes for demand. So, substitutes for demand, remember, is something where, hey, I'm going to consume this instead of this. Like, maybe I'm going to consume hot dogs instead of hamburgers. You know, um, those are things that I would consume this instead of this. Um, Supply substitutes are where I have the same inputs, okay, the same resources, and I say I'm going to produce this instead of this. Well, what would cause me as a producer to produce this instead of this? Well, that's going to come from the price that I'm able to get. If I'm able to get a higher price for this with the same inputs, then I'm going to make this instead of this because I'm trying to make a profit. So let's say you've got two goods that require the same resources to produce. And all of a sudden, the price of this one increases. not to produce it, but the price that I'm getting when I sell it. So if I'm able to sell this one for more than what I'm producing now, well, what should I do? I should start making this instead. So that's going to lead to a decrease in supply of this other good. Alternatively, if the price of this other good that I could make decreases, then all of a sudden it becomes more profitable to make this good. So my supply increases. Let me give you an example. So let's say that you're deciding whether to make a motorcycle or a car. All right. And all of a sudden, the price of motorcycles increases greatly. Well, you go, well, I've got these factories, I've got this aluminum, I've got this labor, I've got all of these things that could be used to make motorcycles. Well, maybe I should make more motorcycles instead and make fewer cars. So, in that case, the supply of cars would decrease because I'm making more motorcycles instead. Um, Same thing if it's like corn and soybeans. Okay, if the price of corn goes down, then maybe I wind up making more soybeans because I'm like, hey, that I'm making more profit with my inputs by making soybeans. Or if the price of corn increases, maybe I make fewer soybeans because okay, now I can make more profit with the other. So all that to say, if the price of a supply substitute increases, supply decreases because we make more of that thing. If price of the substitute decreases, then supply increases because we're making more since we're making less of the other thing. All right, we talked about expectations before. Um, a Expectations can also influence the price of, or sorry, the supply of goods, not just the demand. So if firms expect um, prices to rise on the good that they're about to sell, then they go, should I really sell it now? Maybe I should hold on to it and sell it later when I can sell it for the higher price. Vice versa is also true. If we think that the prices are about to go down, when is the best time to sell it? Now. So all of a sudden, supply increases. So if I think the prices are going to increase, then I decrease supply in the short run. If I think that prices are going to go down, I increase supply in the short run to kind of get rid of it before the price goes down. Now, what about input prices, like the prices that it costs me to make the thing? If I expect my input prices to rise, then, sorry, I don't know why I did this. If I expect my input prices to rise, then that means it's about to become more expensive for me to make this thing. So it's going to cost me more later. So I'm actually going to decrease the amount that I sell that I'm willing to get rid of right now because I know that shortages are coming. I know that um, this is about to become a lot more valuable because my input prices are increasing, and vice versa. If I think that the input prices are about to decrease, then maybe this thing isn't so valuable. I'm probably going to increase supply. Um, if we expect shortages, then I'm going to hold on to some of this. Some people will call it hoarding, but I'm going to hold on to this and sell it later when I can get a higher price for it. Vice versa, if we think there's going to be a surplus, then I might as well sell it now if we're just going to have a surplus later. Okay. Finally, government intervention can affect supply. Similarly to, this is the wrong thing. It should say supply. So a tax on suppliers reduces supply. A subsidy for suppliers increases supply. Uh, this is pretty straightforward. Basically, a tax is basically just an extra cost, whereas a subsidy is like an extra benefit. So it shifts it in pretty much the way that you would expect. Um, Government regulations can increase or decrease supply depending on whether it's favorable to businesses or not. Sometimes it can increase production costs, sometimes it can decrease production costs. Um, so the regulation environment is very important to um, your input costs. So it will affect your supply, sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a bad way. So, like a lot of times, there are um, environmental regulations that make it more expensive to produce a product. Again, I'm not saying these are necessarily bad regulations, but we have to keep in mind that it is going to have an effect on these suppliers. So, long story short, on supply, um, anything that affects how much it costs to produce, whether that's the cost or the opportunity cost, these are going to be the things that affect supply. So what we're going to do now in the next video is we're going to kind of see if we can detect whether something is going to change the demand or the supply. So I'll see you next video.